Today, tanks versus tubs.
Proper Royals.
Hey everybody, it's Adam from Proper Royals. Thanks for joining me today. This channel is all about the journey from family hobbyists and ball pythons to a family business. So we're on that path, and that's what this channel is about. I get asked all the time, should I use tubs or should I use a tank? Let me tell you from the start, you can do either. Anybody that tells you one's impossible and you should never ever do something when it comes to tubs and tanks is probably, no, not probably, they're not right. But listen, there are some better things and there's certain scenarios where they work. So we're gonna go through that today, okay? So I got two simple setups here. This video is not about basic setups. There is another video, you can search my channel on basic tank and basic tub setups. These are just here basically for visual explanation on a few things, all right? So we're gonna go through the pros of both. Obviously, if there's two things you're comparing, the pros of one are the cons of the other. So we're gonna go through the pros and then talk through this a little bit. So tanks, what benefit do you get from tanks? There's really only two as far as I'm convinced of, okay? One is the aesthetics. That's the one everybody's interested in. They look better, I get it. You just got this beautiful snake, you got this beautiful animal, you're enamored with it, and you want to put it in your living room or you want to put it somewhere visible where you can enjoy it all the time. The aesthetics are better in a tub, okay? That's fine. The other pro to it is that you can control the ambient temperature a little bit easier. Now we're going to talk through that because there is one scenario where that's not the case whatsoever. So here's the pros of the tubs, okay? The pros of the tubs to me outweigh everything, and I'll explain to you why, but I am more into tubs, but there are situations where tanks make sense, so we'll get there, okay? The pros of the tubs are really come down to care for the snake. If you look at this tank, you have to black out three sides. You don't have to. I guess you could succeed without doing it. You should. Ball pythons are skittish by nature. They live inside hollowed out tree trunks, termite logs, that sort of thing in the wild. Granted, these snakes are not living in the wild. We would never want them to live in those conditions that they live in the wild. That's why they're pets. That's why we breed them and make exotic varieties. I get that. However, they do have their natural instincts and they are naturally skittish and defensive. They like security. So you got to block out these sides to provide security. They don't want to feel like there's a changing environment on 360 degrees of them. Tubs do that. Even these semi-clear ones provide that. Generally where you store a tub is going to be on some sort of rack shelf where three sides are mostly blacked out. The other option that I use when I have particularly skittish or challenging, usually young ball pythons, is I use this blacked out tub. Provides them total security, just a little bit of light comes through the air holes, so they do still get their circadian rhythms from the light in the room, but the security that it provides is great in the tubs, okay? So it's all about the husbandry and the care for the animal, in my opinion. It's much easier to control humidity in the tubs. Humidity is very, very important to ball pythons. Too little or too much is very detrimental to the snake. So on a tank, you know, I wrestle with press and seal on the top. Some people use tin foil. There's all kinds of things that people use to try and maintain humidity in there. And it's a constant battle because the only way to maintain your ambient temperature on tanks, or not the only way, the best way is through an overhead lamp of some description, whether it's a ceramic heat emitter like I like using, or if it's just an old traditional red bulb, which isn't ideal. It's a constant battle between ambient heat and humidity, and it takes responsibility. You have to balance that. It can be done. It's just going to take time from you, all right? The other thing is the temperature control. Once you get the ambient temperature right, tubs are better at maintaining that temperature. It's just easier. I'll talk through that in a minute. The other benefit to me is the ease of cleaning. Watch this. There's no snake in here. This lid I can take right to the sink. Done. Same thing with this. All set. I dump out the substrate, whether it's a cocoa or whatever you choose to use, and I can get in there and I can wash it and it's fully clean. I almost literally can never do that with a tank. I gotta go outside with a garden hose. That's if I don't have a stuck-on under tank heater with a cord hanging from it. Tubs, pull them in, you pull them out of whatever rack you make, which can be as simple as sort of a bookshelf that gets tidied up and closed in a little bit. The ease of cleaning. Now, here's something I believe passionately in. On one hand, I am talking about cleaning, of spot cleaning. It's soiled, you take it out, it's pretty good. What I'm really talking about is deep cleaning and the health of your animal. You gotta admit, if you're only spot cleaning on a regular basis, like you probably have to do in a tank, you're not getting 100% of the excrement of the snake. You're not getting 100% of everything that snake is shedding off, whether it be saliva, whether it be skin. You're breeding bacteria in there, and then it's propagating and in that environment. I know with my tubs, I clean them almost daily. If it's soiled, I don't do a spot clean. Out with the substrate, snake goes in a different tub, and I clean this thing from top to bottom in my sink. It's just my opinion. You're talking about a live animal here and something you're going to keep in an enclosure for 10 to 15 to 20 years. The other thing is the cost. Let me say up front, if you can't afford to take care of your ball python, you shouldn't have it. There was a time in my life I shouldn't have had ball pythons. And I didn't. I shouldn't have had any pet. I could hardly take care of myself. It's not a criticism, it's just a statement. You're talking about a live animal here that you're committing to care for. I don't care if it's a ball python, a puppy, a child, a bearded dragon, a fish. You're talking about a living being that you need to be able to care for. So whether you go with tubs, tanks, I don't care. Get your PVC enclosure. Those are beautiful and amazing. That's a whole third topic we didn't come up with. But if you can't afford to take care of your ball python, whatever you put it in, just wait. There'll be a ball python in the future for you. Get yourself right before you go getting these snakes, okay? So, that being said, the cost is remarkably different when it comes to tubs and tanks. So let's talk about that. There's the actual enclosure. Look, you can find all sorts of deals on tanks. I readily admit that. I agree with that. They're rarely as good as the deal you're going to find on the tub, just like that when you walk into a Lowe's Hardware and you pay $6 for your basic tub that you're going to start your juvenile up to sub-adult in. This is a 10-gallon tank. In my opinion, if you're doing this right, you're starting your juveniles in here, and that's huge for a juvenile, but you can get away with it. At some point, you got to go up to a 20-gallon. And 20 gallons pretty good, but if you get a big eater, if you get a female, you need to go to a 30 or a 40 at some point. Every one of those tanks is very, very expensive, relatively speaking, even if you're getting a deal. They ain't $6 or $8. $6, $8 or $9 on the bottom. That's what the majority of my adults live in. I got a breeder female, she'll get into a bigger one. Secondly, your shelf, your rack, you can have one heat strip on it on one thermostat. And we're going to get back to that ambient temperature topic in just a minute. Let's set that aside for a second. So you can have one thermostat on one long heat strip for however many snakes you have on that shelf. And then you can do the same thing on the next shelf and plug those all into the very same thermostat. You really can't do that with tanks. Yeah, if you have all your tanks lined up together and they happen to be the exact same size and need the exact same heat distribution, you can. You can't do it with your lamps. You need ambient temperature measured in each individual tank. You need individual thermostats. So really, truly, for every tank, you need 2 thermostats. In a rack system, even a rudimentary one, and I'm not talking the high dollar ones, I'm talking a bookshelf you can convert. I'm talking a weekend project with your son or your daughter where you just build a shelf. You're done with 1 thermostat, and then you're going to have a second one for your ambient temp. We'll talk about that. So the cost is greatly reduced. So you can store them properly. Both of these, I would argue, are proper for a juvenile. But then when it grows up, you're done with this, and then you got to buy a bigger tank. You got to start the whole process over. And you got to do that for every ball python that you have. If you're a hobbyist and you're watching YouTube videos about ball pythons, let me tell you something. You're about to have a problem because you're going to buy more than 2 ball pythons. You're going to go crazy like the rest of us. There's a reason Morph Market exists. There's a reason that YouTube views on ball pythons are through the roof, okay? All right. Let's talk about some things people will say on tanks. Let me just address it. I got opinions, I'll share them with you. You've watched it this far. I got into a discussion today with somebody on Facebook who said, the guy's got a 60-gallon tank. Just let him raise his ball python in that tank. Again, it can be done. I guess in theory, you could figure out how to dribble a football. The only difference is a football is not a living, breathing animal. It doesn't have time for you to figure it out at its expense. They like tight, enclosed, safe, secure areas. A tiny ball python in a huge 60-gallon tank, yes, it can be done. I know the comments are going to get flooded. You just fill it with clutter, fill it with stuff, fill it up, make it feel safe and secure. You're right. You can. Remember my comment about cleaning? You know how long it's going to take you to clean that clutter? And I bet that they don't clean it. I bet they don't clean it thoroughly. And I know that somebody's going to get offended, but who's got 3, 4, 5 hours a week to go cleaning fake plastic vines that you've shoved into a 60-gallon tank that's unnecessary in the first place? It's selfish of you. A pet relationship absolutely has something to do with the owner's enjoyment, but it should have more to do with the pet's well-being. Same thing if you're a breeder, more so if you're a breeder. If you're a breeder, it has less to do with your enjoyment and even more to do with the pet's well-being, with that snake's well-being. So you can do it. I'm not saying you can't. You want to set up a 60-gallon tank and fail your way up as you figure it out? You can. Don't forget there's a living, breathing animal that depends on you and you alone while you're experimenting and figuring this stuff out, okay? So here's my conclusion. Tubs, in general, are better for you. Let me talk about the times that I think a tank might be better for you. If you have 1 ball python and you're only ever going to have 1 ball python and you got the time and the resources, that's not a huge amount of resources, but if you got the time and the resources to grow your setup with your snake appropriately, by all means, have a tub, enjoy it aesthetically. Remember, they're nocturnal animals, so when you're done with a long day of work and you want to stare at your ball python into the evening, your ball python wants it dark. That's when it thinks it's naturally supposed to go explore and hunt and do the things that snakes do. So you got to think through that, okay? But that's a scenario where that makes sense. 2 ball pythons, sure. You got the time, the patience, the devotion, by all means, use a tank. I started with tanks. I have a tank. This thing's ready to go. This is my quarantine tank. I still use tanks for quarantine. It can be done. Man, at 3 snakes, I don't know. That's a lot. To clean it properly, I mean, to clean this thing, you really got to have almost a bucket, a spray bottle, and you're still not able to just spray the thing out and dump it. I mean, it's just not reasonable. It's not realistic if you think about it. It happens, but the effort that goes into it is exhausting. So I'll say from 1 to 3 ball pythons, if you're just in love with tanks and that's what you want, by all means do it and enjoy it, get fulfillment. I had 3 tanks until it all clicked for me that tubs were the way to go. Other than my quarantine tank, these sit in the garage for the next customer that goes, hey, can you sell me a snake with a setup? Yep. Ship that thing right down the river. Tubs. One thing I haven't addressed yet is how you keep the ambient temperature of your tubs. That's the real challenge with tubs. I'll admit it and I'll acknowledge it. I've got a simple solution, but you got to figure out how committed you are to this. And I'll take you down to my snake room in just a second to show you also, so stick with me. If you have a tub, you can't really put a light hanging over it. You sort of can, but just the way it insulates inward, it insulates outward as well. Plus, where you're going to stick the probe under the lid, you want to know, you need to know what's going on inside the tub. So what I recommend is that you've got to pick a small walk-in closet, a small room, a small space in your house that you can actually heat to a constant ambient temperature. And I know you're going, you telling me to heat a whole room in my house and that it's overboard to want to have a tank? I know, hear me out. If you can do it, do it. I'll show you when we're down in my room. The oil register that I have, it doesn't run very much. I have a thermostat running that and it heats the room to a constant 78 year round. Springtime, I usually unplug it. Wintertime comes, I plug it back in. So I have a heat pad on the one side of the tub, on the back of the rack that I slide it into, and then the air around it is all a constant 78 all the time. So I know the hot side's at 90, I know the cool side's at a 78, and you got the temperature gradient in there. I'm a big advocate for that. If you get to the point where you got 4 snakes, you'll probably get to the point where you have 6. And if you have 6, you'll get to the point where you have 10. And if you start breeding them because you want to get in the game and figure out and see what you got, you're going to need a room anyway. So that's the one caveat that you got to think about. Now, it doesn't have to be a room. It could be a walk-in closet that you set aside a nice tidy rack for. And I mean, you could store 5 snakes from here to here. Rack, 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 rack. This is too high right here, so that's 5. It doesn't have to take up a whole lot of space. It's all in what you want, but when you're considering what you want, make sure you're taking into account the well-being of the animal as well. So my vote is for tubs, as long as you can figure out the ambient temperature question. If you're going to go more than 3 snakes, get tubs, figure out the ambient temperature question. If not, have a fun hobby with the tanks. Just do it right. Take the time to clean. Don't let that excrement and waste fester in their tank. You wouldn't do it to a dog. You wouldn't do it to yourself. Take care of them, huh? All right, so here I am in my snake room. You see my snake rack here? Aesthetically, it's probably not quite as pleasing as 4 beautiful tanks would be. I get that. But look, it's nice and organized. It's clean. I have 1 heat strip per shelf under there. 1 thermostat for the top 3, 1 thermostat for the bottom 3. That's it. As far as the ambient temperature heating, I use this oil register here. It's electric, it's oil filled, and I run it on a thermostat of its own. It's back here, and the probe is right here. Hi, Maya. And the probe is right here. So I measure the ambient temperature. It stays at 78 constantly in here. The last thing that I use, because heat rises and we want an even temperature across the board, is I use one of these little Honeywell fans pointing straight up to circulate the air. From a financial standpoint, and I've talked about this in some of my other videos, I found that oil register at the Amazon warehouse online. If you click new and used other offers, found that for 26 bucks. I found the fan for $12 or $14. So what? I'm 40 bucks in on heating those. To buy a lamp, a CHE, and even a cheap thermostat, you're in for way more than 40 bucks per tank if you use a tank. So there's my argument. So thanks for hearing me out. I hope you got some clarity on your decision. And I hope if you got value out of it, you'll hit that like button for me. If you want to follow me on my continued journey from family hobby to family business with ball pythons, hit subscribe. I'll keep the videos coming. Until then, cheers to you wherever you are. Thanks for joining me today. I'll see you next time, okay?